Genius, the Korean Protoss player who went on to face DRG in a GSL Finals, is going to be taking on the American macro machine, IdrA Fields here. IdrA took down the incredibly hyped TSL Clyde last round. This is the January 2011 GSL Code S. This was the first Code S they ever did. There were 3 GSLs before this in 2010, but those weren't true Code S's, those were open brackets. So this is the round of 16 group. And in this group, IdrA Fields, our methodical American macro protagonist, Genius, who's down here in the bottom left, a aggressive Protoss player who wasn't afraid to macro. He's the sort of sharp Korean aggressive that made you really feel the difference between playing on NA in Korea versus just like dumb cheesy aggressive like a guy like MVP Tails, or even like a Galsy or a Combat X who was like all about abuse and getting in your face. And in the early days of StarCraft 2, and honestly throughout StarCraft 2 history to some extent, there were 2 kinds of Protoss players. There were the macro Protoss players and the cheesy Protoss players. And to some extent, this is true for all the races. You're either a macro player or a cheeser to some extent, as far as what you prefer and what sort of game you're going for. But in the early days of StarCraft, there were definitively 2 different kinds of Protoss players. There were guys like Huck and MC who were going to make a bunch of warp gates and get a pylon down on the map and brutalize you with aggressive micro, get good force fields down, and brute force you. You really use the Protoss units, and those guys would do stuff like what we're seeing right now, a cannon rush. So that's a full wall if you're not aware. And IdrA, even though he went pool first, as soon as the pool finishes, he can make lings, and the lings are not going to be out in time to kill the pylon and kill the cannon. So this is one of those things where if the Protoss player gets those pylons down, then the hatch is dead, because once the pylons go down and the C-Jet Galsy style in-your-face cannon rush, you can't block it. And now IdrA knows that, so he's going to cancel. Genius sees he canceled his hatch, and he's going to cancel one of the cannons because sort of a waste of money for there to be 2 cannons back there, and Genius is going to expand behind this. So it's worth noting that at this time, Forge Fast Expand was not standard. If you look at StarCraft 2 from the beginning of the beta, which was like March of 2010, and you look at it all the way to December of 2011, you saw a lot of gate expand. There was a thought process of 1 gate expand was the more standard greedy build, and 3 gate expand you might do on a map like this where it's more wide or you need more units. And this of course was a way slower expansion than like Nexus First or Forge Fast Expand. At the beginning of 2012, Protoss players realized they could go Forge Fast Expand, and that became the new standard. And once Protoss players figured that out, ZVP became very hard until until June of 2012, when they buffed the Queen and the Overlord. That was one of the biggest patches in StarCraft 2 history, and that's when we saw things slide more to the Zerg favored side of the metagame. But in this era, still very Terran and Protoss favored, and even though Forge Fast Expand wasn't standard, it was used as a cannon rushing opening in this instance because Genius knew that he could get that spot down and break IdrA's natural. As you see roaches marching across the map, this was what really you had to do whenever your natural got cannon rushed, and these maps were so small and clunky, there wasn't an easy third, as IdrA's going to try to encroach here. And I know the quality's gone to shit. Remember, this is just some random VOD that a guy ripped, as we really see the quality degrading. But IdrA aggressed with lings, and now he's going to come up with roaches. And this is one of those things where is he going to take his third? The one that's cut off by rocks or at the gold, and he's going to try to dive on this cannon with Roach Sling. Remember, no Ravagers at the time, so aggressive Zerg, so much worse, so foolish and greedy of Genius to make the 1 cannon. He knows that IdrA is going to be forced to make Roaches or Lings to try to counterattack, and even though this is a big choke, Genius got really greedy. He never cut probes, he only made the 1 gate, and he was trying to do everything at once, trying to make this big dick wall. He went for the cannon rush to get the initial lead, and now IdrA just has to kite back and knock down the cannons. We'll hold that thought. There's 2 of them up now, so he'll run back a bit. Notice the probe's on hold position there, so if IdrA just A-moved, the roaches would have derped out. IdrA fires upon that bottom cannon and kills it. Genius trying to fire up more cannons. And this is the classic Protoss. I got ahead, but then tried to do too many things at once. You really have to be committed to holding that front door and keeping the expansion up before you start to do a bunch of crazy teching, because all you have to do is stabilize here and stop the roach push, and IdrA's literally on 20 workers with no tech and a base that's out in the dick farm and undefendable. But what do we see from Genius instead? Just mass double pumping workers, and really relying on that one cannon is laughable. Like on a big open map like this, you gotta go another cannon after the Nexus. I mean, you see an open map. This is the map in the pool where really aggressive Zerg gets at his best, in the sense that if you want to put pressure on the natural, it's not a fucking choke that can be stopped with 2 force fields. This is the most open map in the pool, and one of the most open maps in StarCraft 2 history in terms of the structure of the natural. There's a little backdoor alley. There's 2 huge chokes that aren't even ramps. And at this point, we see Genius sort of with his dick in his hand saying, well, shit. Am I just going to do a big gateway all in behind this? I'm starting to mine out my main. He's getting his cyber core back up. I wonder if that cannon is fucking blocking the Nexus. That would be brutal. But I'm not trying to be overtly negative here or make the players look bad, but I just really want to talk about and focus on this specific factor, and that's this, is that I talk about frequently in this Gregathon series how bad Zerg was at the time. And we consult the cannon rush that Genius did, like, wasn't tricky or hard to execute. It was a 3 mineral, 2 cannon, like, heavy investment. And yeah, okay, he canceled one of the cannons after IdrA canceled his natural, but Genius was a very highly ranked, talented guy that, like I said, went on to fucking play in a finals. Like, think about how many ladder matches against Zergs that he won, like, doing that opening. I'm going to make a couple cannons on Xel'Naga Caverns, and where are you going to take your third? I can't stress this enough, people. On a normal map, you get cannon rush, you just go take your third. That's laughably easy. Like on all the cookie cutter maps now, like there are oftentimes like 2/3, or like your third base and fourth base will be easily equal. They will be easily to defend equally. What do we see on this map? The normal third base is blocked by rocks and virtually undefendable. The gold base in the middle is literally in the middle of the map, of a short rush distance map, and has rocks covering it. That literally leads these stupid side bases that nobody would ever take that IdrA took. And we can see in this low econ game where he's pretty fucking sure that Genius is just going to make some units and re-push him, he is fastidiously and intelligently using overlords to make a creep highway between these bases, because remember, he's very behind tech-wise. 3 force fields go down, and this is what I'm talking about. No Ravager, so if you got a few good force fields down, a lot of times you were just doomed. Well, IdrA's so insanely far ahead in this game that he's still able to defend, but this is the sort of thing that Protoss players would do to get back in games, where even when they would fall way behind, they could add some gates, do a big follow-up push, and if you had your dick in your hand as Zerg, you didn't scout as well as you should have, you didn't have a Ling at the front of your base, you didn't notice a warp prism, you didn't notice a pylon, the Protoss player gets their army in a spot like that, gets a couple force fields down on a ramp, and it's over. These maps were so narrow and chodish and short. You have to consider it in this era. A couple force fields were devastating. It's not like maps are now where they're so cookie cutter, big defender's advantage, all the thirds are easy to take. As IdrA screams in here with mass roach Ling, bringing the fucking hammer down. And at this point, the Protoss player is so far behind, he doesn't have much of anything. He doesn't have much tech, he doesn't have many gateway units. Okay, he has quite a few cannons, admittedly, but against this many roaches, that's not going to do it. And you can see that Genius brought his probes up and put them on hold position to interfere with the AI of the roaches. Genius has done a pretty good job micro-wise, but it's like, how are you gonna, it's like microing 3 stalkers against 25 roaches. And remember, there's no battery, no fucking mothership core at this time in early Wings of Liberty. And this is classic what IdrA's doing, where he's running forward, sniping the units when he can, but not trying to overcommit into the cannons, and then retreating to go back and pressure the Nexus, force the Protoss player to push up again, push them back, and then whenever he ran all the way back on the cannons, fall back, attack the Nexus. It's sort of like playing post-plant in Counter-Strike, as you see a skill ray come out here, is IdrA really wants to knock out both the Stargate and the Nexus, because once he does that, with 10 Hydras on the way, this one's essentially unlosable. It would also be nice to get the Cyber Cores. The first Hydra arrives, and this goes from being a game where if you're Genius and you're like, maybe he's on like extended, he's committed to roaches, has less drones that I think, and I can queef out a couple of skill rays here and I'll be able to fly to his base and he won't have voids. Think that disgusting game that we saw earlier in the Gregathon against Lotzi Prime on Lost Temple, where Lotzi went proxy Stargate and got 3 void rays and showed up in IdrA's vase and there was no anti-air. But GG's called, as IdrA plays perfectly there and brilliantly wins. So let's just hit the high points of the game and sort of like think about what happened in this game and how IdrA won. Because whenever I do this Venomous Classic series, and especially the Gregathon, it's not just about, oh, this guy that I like won a game. Like, I want to examine what he did to win in this meta. So you have a Protoss player going for a move and a build order that's essentially, it's gonna work in terms of he's gonna get the cannons down. It's impossible for you to prevent him from getting the cannons down if he really wants to, because that cannon spot's so easy. You can say like, oh, he should have gone pool first. He did go pool first. If you do that spot with the wall and you want to commit 3 pylons and 2 cannons, you're going to get the natural. Now, the reason that you're like, well, why doesn't he do that every game? Well, on other maps, you might be able to take the third more easily, and it's not that big of a deal. You saw the third on this map. IdrA had to take way down in the Dick Farm, the last exterior base on the map, the base that's almost never taken, and a base that is virtually impossible to get creep down to, and IdrA intelligently moved his overlords to form a super highway of creep. If he hadn't done that, he would have lost. The Protoss army would have gotten all the way up there, and between the vision that he wouldn't have had and the speed that he would have lacked, having slow, shitty roaches, the Protoss player would have force fielded that ramp, sniped that base, and then it would have been base advantage Protoss, which is wild to think about. So after he accrued the initial advantage, he knew, because he does the strat every time he's on this map probably against Zerg, he ain't going to take the gold, it has rocks on it. He ain't going to take the other third, he can't defend it because of the other rocks. So he's only ever going to go to that base, realistically. All the other bases are literally undefendable or like right on top of the Protoss. So let's just rewind a little bit more to sort of take stock of like, alright, well, the roaches are coming across the map. As the toss player, you like see him take that other base and you know like, okay, well, I'm going to be able to just attack that. With gateway stuff later, it'll be easy to kill. So at this point, it's like all I have to do is not die, right? You know an attack's coming. He has 200 right here. Like, let's pause. He had 250 minerals right here, the Protoss player did. Like, you gotta have, like, another probe on the map. You gotta have something at the tower. And you should be making a unit no matter what. But here, like, you have to ask yourself, the Zerg's expansion is off in the Dick Farm, and it's gonna be impossible to defend. He's down on workers. I've been fucking double pumping, and I'm doing a big transfer. If I can hold my expansion for the next 2 minutes, like this, if I can just not die to this stupid counter attack, I have an insurmountable advantage basically and can kill him with the counter push, because he's not going to be able to defend that stupid exterior base. But like right here, you should see like 3 cannons in the production tab. And this is something that I say, like, not to put down non-Zerg players, but in this era, you had to make stupid mistakes with Terran and Protoss to lose to Zerg. This is like a great example of a stupid mistake. You essentially have like a build order that you're going to get a huge advantage from no matter what. You do this build order all the time on ladder. You know the Zerg has 2 fucking responses to go take that base and macro, or to attack you from either one base or with that fucking hatchery that you just saw him take, not making anything, right? Regardless, you're going to need to defend your front door, and the Zerg's almost always going to make stuff because he's behind and counterattack you. So like, what do? You make a couple extra cannons. And like, Genius played this so fucking greedy. And like, you can't make Ravagers in this era. Ravagers didn't exist until Legacy. So you can't just bile down the cannons. That's a big reason why Forge Fast Expand went out of style. The fucking Ravager. The Zerg's sitting here with shitty roaches that can't transition well. And that was a big reason why attacking Zerg early, keeping them on the back foot, and making them make roaches was so good and was seen as a linchpin of the fucking matchup for the whole Wings of Liberty era. Because roaches were shit. If you make a Zerg make roaches now, he can fucking make them into Ravagers, which are some of the most useful units in the game. And Ravagers are really good at shutting down abusive stuff like siege tank pushes, dead air abuse, drop play, mass cannons. So if you were Protoss in this era, the Ravager was the worst thing in the world. Well, it didn't exist. So that means that in this situation, you tell yourself, okay, he's going to attack with Roach Ling, or Mass Roach. What do? Make a couple extra cannons. What did Genius do? Fucking nothing. And this was, again, like a really good top-tier Korean player at the time. They had to make a really fucking stupid mistake like this to give the Zerg the advantage. And you might be saying to yourself, well, no one plays perfect. Like, yeah, he made a mistake, but it was early in the game's life. People like MVP and MC, like, didn't make mistakes. And that was, like, the crux of what IdrA was talking about through a lot of his career. Whenever he would, like, win a big tournament, and he would still be saying, like, yeah, well, Zerg still can't scout, Zerg is still bad. And people would be like, well, you won the tournament, LOL. And it was like that famous discussion he had on State of the Game after he beat Kiwi Kaki. And IdrA was like, yeah, well, I've been in Korea for years and years. And like, I'm better than these guys. I should have been able to beat Kiwi Kaki in a fucking best of 5. And he barely did it and had to use really creative strategies to do it. I've revisited that one on the Venomous Classic series before. But this is what I'm talking about. Like, Genius just walks to his natural, queefs out a couple cannons, and then suddenly IdrA has to do a big dumb roach all-in that literally should never work. Like, because from Genius's perspective, it's like, what can he do to win from this spot? He's gonna make like roaches and lings and attack me. Like, what counters that? Like making a bunch of extra cannons, and he didn't. And he's done this build a bunch, and like presumably on ladder has died to the counterattack. And it's like, make an extra cannon, LOL. If you had just made some extra cannons, the Zerg shows up with roaches, and they're behind the terrible wall you've made. And when I said terrible, I was going to say the roaches have like terrible shorter range than they did at this time. They have to like walk up to the gateway to hit a pylon behind it. If you just fucking SimCity properly with a few extra cannons, Genius wins. But instead, IdrA wins. And again, right here, if the creep highway wasn't there, IdrA's army is just like stuck around out here. He has slow roaches. Galil Constitution isn't done yet. Genius just walks up there and hits a couple force fields. Genius knew about this base 6 minutes ago. He didn't sneak a pylon bottom right. Like, think about this push with the pylon snuck in the bottom right of the map. He actually hits those force fields where he doesn't get chased off by lings, does another warp in. Like, Genius was a great player at the time, but he made a lot of fucking mistakes this game and didn't deserve to win. Sub for more.